Hello, welcome. My name is Miriam. I'm a family therapist, and today I've got with me Pat Williams. And Pat is an author. These are two of her recent books. She's a psychotherapist and a storyteller, and the former director of the College of Storytelling. And I'm going to ask you some questions about stories and about children, if that's okay. In this day of multimedia, film, computer games, is it still important to tell stories to children, and if so, then why?
Well, very important, because the brain works in a narrative way, and the story fits the way the brain works. And it's really important for children who come into this world of a tumult of impulses and chaotic impressions and so on, to have those stories there as sort of maps and handholds for them to map this world they've come into and give the brain the patterns it needs to make sense of it. Mm-hmm. Lullabies do it before words even come. Lullabies are sort of sung stories without words. Children have this brain, we all have this brain, which is a storytelling brain. And if you watch, say, as I've done, a little toddler sort of staring at a television set which is on because her mother just plonked her there while she got on with something else, you can see the child telling itself the story of what it's watching on the screen, and it's always step by step, forward in time, narrative. And therefore stories are incredibly important, and to put the right patterns in, patterns which match at a very positive and useful level what they will find outside and what they will find in their minds.
Mm-hmm. So is there such a thing as a really good story or not such a good story, and how can you tell the difference?
Well, I think we know it innately. I mean, there are stories you just wouldn't tell to a child, and you know what they are, and every mother and every adult knows what they are, unless you deliberately want to frighten it too much. Mm-hmm. If a story has a frightening element within it, that's all right, as long as that is overcome by the hero or heroine or whoever, and it moves on to a really good resolution by the end. Mm-hmm. But in the middle you can have difficulty, because that introduces difficulty into the mind of the child as something that can be got through hard at the time, but you move on. Mm-hmm. And it all resolves in the end.
So is this one of the patterns you were mentioning?
Yes,
is that
yes.
There is a difficulty, the heroine or the hero can overcome it, and
Yes.
then everything is okay?
Yes, and if you cast your mind back to the stories you heard as a child, that was always happening, you know, and terrible things would happen to the prince or the princess, and there were dragons abounding and all kinds of things. But those were always in the middle chapters of the story, so to speak, and all comes right, you know. So the child gets the pattern of resolution. Just keep going, no matter how hard it is. Just remember where that story when, and children do.
Mm-hmm. And I sometimes talk to parents who believe that they're not very good at telling stories. They don't know how to do it right. What can you say to them?
Oh, poor things. No, there isn't a right. It's an instinct. You don't have to be a wonderful actor or anything like that. You just tell the story, and the only right thing to do is to engage with the person who's listening, their child, and try and exaggerate everything in a way to make it really interesting for the child, you know. Show how much you're enjoying it while you're telling it. How great it is that we're connected by this story now. And the thing is, you see, that the ear is much closer to the brain than the eye is. It develops in the womb 7.5 months before the eye does. So hearing is much more potent than reading.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that it's a good idea to talk about the stories and interpret them with the child afterwards? Or?
Ah, that's a good question. In my view, never. Never, never, never allow the story to do its work within the mind of the child, because otherwise you are taking, it's like being a thief, you're taking away something valuable from the child. Let them just have the story within them to ruminate and think about as much as they want to. Mm-hmm. If you see that a story is frightening a child, then you can step in and remind them, oh no, it's only a story and it probably came out all right in the end, or something just to calm them down. But otherwise, just leave them alone.
So Pat, where can you find these really good stories for children?
Gosh, absolutely everywhere. They are one source, which is so reliable, are traditional stories that have come down the centuries. Mm-hmm. Because if they have survived, that is a sure sign that there's something in those stories mm-hmm. which human beings need, which is why they've held on to them. And so traditional stories are one very good source of stories for children. Anything that maps something that a child might be worried about and resolves it. Like if a child is worried about getting lost, Hansel and Gretel, for instance. Mm-hmm. You know, if a child is worried about cruelty, there are lots of stories about wicked witches and horrible queens and all that sort of thing. Bad mothers, in fact. Mm-hmm. But it always comes out all right in the end, and the story always takes you from the middle chapters, which are so hard, to the end where it's resolved. And that builds in a pattern of difficulty, struggling with it, coming out the other side, resolution, mm-hmm. which is a pattern the mind seeks the whole time to overcome dissonance, negativity, pessimism, all mm-hmm. these things. Mm-hmm. And so the story I'm thinking of is so simple to illustrate to you how even the simplest story can have something worth talking about. And it's the story of this tailor who was always making clothes for other people and never actually had anything very nice for himself. But then one day he had a length of cloth left over from all sorts of places, or lengths of cloth. So he joined them all together and made a wonderful, well, he saw that didn't have quite enough for a jacket after all. So maybe he could make a waistcoat, he thought, but then he found he didn't have quite enough for a waistcoat. So he thought, maybe a vest. So he tried to put bits of cloth together, not quite enough for a vest. He'd been over-optimistic. And when he looked, there was very little left. There really wasn't enough for a cap even. But then he thought, hang on a minute, and he picked up the small piece of cloth, which he did have left over, and thought, maybe it can cover a button. There wasn't even enough for that. And so he thought and he thought about what it could cover, and then he realized that there was just enough left over to tell this story. And when you ponder that, even in that simple story, there are metaphors and understandings to be had.
Yeah, and we're not going to interpret them here. Thank you very much, Pat. Thank you for coming here. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Enjoy your children, and please like, subscribe, and see you in the next video.